Before this video gets started, I would like to ask if you can kindly please hit that subscribe button and make sure to turn on notifications, because sometimes I could always be making a banger for you guys. And also make sure to hit that like button, because I've really put all my hard work into making all these videos. And with that out of the way, let's get back to the video, shall we? Welcome to the Lost, Obscure, Cancelled Video Games Iceberg. How this iceberg chart will work is that apparently I will start talking about games that were canceled from the tip of the iceberg all the way to the dark abyss. And also a bonus one, so stay tuned. Also, while doing this iceberg video, in the background of the video, I'm going to be providing gameplay of me playing Batman Rise of Sinzu. Why? I just felt like it. So, onto the video. The tip of the iceberg. Silent Hills, also known as PT. Silent Hills is a canceled horror game developed by Kojima Productions that was supposed to be published by Konami Digital Entertainment for the PlayStation 4. Now, it was in development in 2012 until its cancellation in 2015. It was supposed to be an main installment in the, Silent Hill series, and it was set to be directed by Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro. The series publisher Konami brought Kojima onto the project in September 2012, announcing the game was playable via PT, which stands for Playable Teaser, which was basically the game demo that was released on PlayStation Store in 2014 of August. However, sadly, in March 2015, sources reported that due to conflicts with Konami, Kojima and his senior staff planned to leave Konami the following completion of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Concurrently, Konami announced a restructuring of its video game business and removed references to Kojima and Kojima Productions from its promotional materials of its games, which included this game as well. Scalebound. Scalebound was an action role-playing game developed by Platinum Games from 2013 up until its cancellation in 2017. It was said to be released in 2017 for Windows and Xbox One. However, sadly, Microsoft Studios announced its cancellation in January 2017. In the game, the players would assume control of Drew and his dragon partner. Thubbin players could use a variety of weapons to defeat enemies and issue commands to the dragon. And it's kind of sad that this game sadly got cancelled. It would have looked so cool though. Star Wars 1313. Star Wars 1313 was a canceled third-person action-adventure game set in the criminal underworld of Coruscant's level 1313. I'm really hoping I pronounced that right. Now, players take on a role of a bounty hunter, aka Boba Fett, using human skills and gadgets to navigate the dangerous world and uncover a criminal conspiracy. The game was set to be developed by LucasArts and other Lucas companies and was built using the Unreal Engine. However, sadly, and I'm saying sadly, Disney bought out LucasArts, Lucasfilms, and it obviously caused the cancellation of LucasArts, which also caused the cancellation of Star Wars 1313. And it's sad that the game never got made because the company just bought them out. Resident Evil 1.5. Resident Evil 1.5 is the unofficial name given to the canceled prototype of the 1998 survival horror game Resident Evil 2, and it was developed by Capcom for the PlayStation 1 and directed by Hideki Kamiya and Shinji Mikami. I'm also really hoping I pronounced those correctly. Now, the game was, of course, reworked into, what we know as Resident Evil 2. So, that wasn't that hard. Dinosaur Planet. Dinosaur Planet was a canceled game developed by Rare and was set to be published by Nintendo, planned for a release on the Nintendo 64, but later intended for the Nintendo GameCube. Originally, the game had nothing to do with the Star Fox series and was intended to be a standalone title. According to an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, he had noticed striking similarities between the game's characters. So, the game was reworked into, what we know as Star Fox Adventures. Halo DS. Halo DS was a game that was set to be released for the Nintendo DS. The game was rumored around 2007, but was never really acknowledged by the developers Bungie, and Microsoft. The game never really advanced beyond an unsolicited demo, meaning that we never got a DS port of the best Xbox game of all time, Halo. Fallout Online, also known as Project V13. Fallout Online was a cancelled, massively multiplayer online role-playing game developed by Interplay and Masthead Studios, and was intended to be the first online Fallout game. Well, yes, I am going to count Fallout 76, but just hear me out. This game was set to be the first online Fallout game. Nothing else was known about the game, really, other than the fact that, well, all of it was completed. But there was a problem. It was with Interplay and, of course, Bethesda Studios. You see, it turns out Bethesda Studios did not want Interplay to use, the Fallout licensing anymore since, well, Bethesda owns the rights now. So, the game was left canceled and, well, reworked into what we know as Fallout 76. Yeah. Pac-Man Ghost Zone. Pac-Man Ghost Zone was a cancelled PlayStation game that was developed by Namco Home Tech, and it was planned to be released around November 1997, but due to quality issues, the game was, cancelled. Now, the story unfolds in an arcade. The latest arcade game was crowded, and a kid is unable to find space to play the game, and a teen pushes him away, telling him to go play Pac-Man. And the kid goes up to the Pac-Man arcade cabinet and repeatedly insults it and kicks it by calling it stupid and old. This, of course, angers Blinky and Inky and their master, the Ghost Lord, who orders two ghosts to use their pixel cannon to digitize subjects from the real world, which, of course, sucks the kid inside and he turns into Pac-Man, and, of course, I don't really know the whole plot. However, the game was then reworked into Pac-Man World. Probably one of the best Pac-Man 3D platformers out there, let me tell you. Sonic Extreme. Sonic Extreme was a platform game developed by Sega Technical Institute from 1994 until its cancellation in 1996. It was planned to be the first fully 3D Sonic game. And no, Sonic 3D Blast does not count. And taking Sonic into the 3D era of video games. The game would have been released on the Sega Saturn and also a planned PC release. The storyline followed Sonic on his journey to stop Dr. Robotnik from stealing the 6 magical rings from Tyra Boboski and her father. Now, Extreme was supposed to feature open levels, rotating fixed center of gravity, and, like previous Sonic games, feature collectible rings and fast-paced gameplay. However, the game was sadly canceled. And also, there would have been a movie called Sonic the Hedgehog Wonders of the World that would have also included the game Sonic Extreme. However, that movie ended up being canceled. And it's kind of sad we never got to saw, Sonic Extreme ever happen. Super Mario 64 2. Super Mario 64 2 was a planned sequel to, the smash success Super Mario 64. Now, it was set to be released on the Nintendo disk drive. The console that really flopped, the Nintendo 64. However, unfortunately, due to, the disk drive being such an absolute failure, the game was sadly canceled. And a lot of, the project was reworked, of course, into Super Mario Sunshine for the GameCube. The Surface. Pandemic's The Dark Knight video game. In 2007, a Batman video game loosely based on the Dark Knight movie was announced by actor Gary Oldman. The video game was about to be published by EA or Electronic Arts and developed by Pandemic Studios, a studio software known for games like Destroy All Humans. However, sadly, Pandemic Studios has since shut down, and it caused the cancellation of 3 games, including the Dark Knight video game, which made the Dark Knight movie the very first Batman game to never receive a tie-in video game. Now, for those who are wondering what it was supposed to be, it was originally supposed to be an open-world 3D platformer, which would have basically predated Arkham Asylum. Superman Returns PlayStation Portable port. With Superman Returns already coming out on Nintendo DS, PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and Xbox 360, there were talks of a PSP port that would have been released at the same time. However, unfortunately, the PSP port was canceled, most likely because the PSP had hardware limitations that couldn't process, the game. So, yeah, the PSP port was canceled due to hardware limitations. Similar to the Nintendo 3DS, sort of, keeping out the Ice Climbers in Smash 4 because of hardware limitations. Batman Begins PSP port. Once again, another PSP port that was canceled. Now, Batman Begins had already came out on mobile phones, Xbox Original, PS2, and GameCube, and also the Game Boy Advance. Now, there were talks of a PSP port release. However, that project has been canceled for unknown reasons. Yeah, the game was canceled for unknown reasons. Mother 3 Nintendo 64 version, aka Earthbound 64. Now, yes, Mother 3 was actually released for the Game Boy Advance, but in 1996, there was a planned Nintendo 64 development soon to be moved to the Nintendo 64 disk drive, which was shown on E3 1997 convention that the game would probably utilize the Rumble Pack in battle sequence. However, due to, the Nintendo 64 disk drive being a hardware failure, and on August 21st, 2000, the project was revived in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance, which only got released in Japan in 2006. So yeah, Mother 3 was canceled, and all we got left are just screenshots, demos, and that's pretty much it. Star Fox 2. Star Fox 2 was a sequel to, the very first Star Fox game for the Super Nintendo. It was supposed to be a standalone sequel that was supposed to be released on the Super Nintendo, but the game was sadly canceled because Nintendo concerned that the 16-bit graphics would of course compare poorly to newer games that were being released for, the Nintendo 64. So the game was canceled because the Nintendo 64 had just arrived and it was reworked to, Star Fox 64. But here's a good thing. Star Fox 2 did end up finally coming out, but it was only for the Super Nintendo Classic. Thrill Kill, PlayStation 1. Thrill Kill is a canceled fighting game developed by Paradox Development for the original PlayStation, originally intended to release in 1998. The game's plot involves 10 people who all get sent to hell after dying on Earth and are forced by Maruka, the goddess of secrets, to fight to the death for a chance of reincarnation. Now, it was marketed as the first 4-player 3D fighting game. The game was supposed to be released in October 1998. However, it was canceled due to its graphic content that would have made them have a lot of controversy, which would have given them more controversy than what Mortal Kombat and Night Trap already had back then. Sonic DS. Sonic DS is an unreleased game for the Nintendo DS that was first shown as a playable demo during E3 2004. The game would have had you controlling Sonic with the DS stylus. However, the game was, canceled, and it was then reworked into Sonic Rush, which became the first Sonic game on the Nintendo DS. Metroid 64. Metroid 64 was the supposed title for a Metroid game that was set to be released for the Nintendo 64 after Super Metroid. Many fans were waiting for a sequel. It was supposed to be slated for the Nintendo 64, but while the game was really mentioned several times, it never really entered production because they couldn't come out with any concrete ideas. The Body. Bioforce Ape. Bioforce Ape is a cancelled NES game about a mutant monkey that has to save his adopted human family from a mad scientist. Despite repeatedly getting mentioned on Nintendo Power, it was cancelled for unknown reasons in 1992. But then in 2005, a user by the name of Paul Brown claimed to have obtained a prototype of Bioforce Ape. However, this was confirmed to be a hoax. Later on in March 2010, a Japanese prototype of Bioforce Ape surfaced in Yahoo Japan auction. Paul Brown was noticed this and notified Lost Levels owner Frank Cifaldi, who organized an emergency meeting of site staff. So the game appears to be complete with the exception of the final boss, which does not move or attack the player. Pokemon Pink. Pokemon Pink version was a planned entry in the Pokemon role-playing video game franchise that was conceptualized at some point in the late 1990s. The game would have had served as a companion title to the released Pokemon Yellow version in much the same fashion as how Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue had served as companion titles to each other several years earlier. It is currently unknown if the game actually began development, but apparently the status sadly has been confirmed as existence unconfirmed. Grand Theft Auto Tokyo. Unfortunately, I couldn't find really much information on Grand Theft Auto Tokyo and what the game was supposed to be about, but supposedly Rockstar was in talks to be developed by an unspecified game studio in Japan. Now, I don't know if this game actually does exist or if it was even real, but what I'm trying to say is that I'm pretty sure this game probably never exists. This project never really existed, and it was probably considered, false. Sonic Crackers. Sonic Crackers, also known in the ROM header as Sonic Stadium, is an early prototype of a Sonic the Hedgehog game for the Sega Genesis. It is believed to have been a test engine containing essentially multiple different game engines swapped out in the real-time code using code written into RAM. However, the game would have had Sonic and Tails joined together by a band of rings, and, that's pretty much it. However, the game was then reworked into Knuckles Chaotix. Kirby's Air Ride, Nintendo 64 prototype. Kirby's Air Ride is a Nintendo GameCube game that was released in 2003. It was a spin-off in the Kirby franchise. However, the game actually had a really long production spanning from 1995 all the way to 2003, which the footage in the game was actually formerly Kirby Bowl 64. In a very different state was shown. However, in E3 1996, the game was renamed to Kirby's Air Ride. The game was set to be released on the Nintendo 64, but then it was released on the Nintendo GameCube. So, yeah. Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie, not Banjo-Kazooie, I got that mixed up when I was making the Iceberg chart, was a prototype for the original Xbox, which was started at Rare in the year 2004. Players were able to construct their carts out of different parts. Then it was canceled, and the concept may have evolved into what we know as Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Sonic 2, Simon Way prototype. When Sonic 2 came out on Sega Genesis, it was an obvious smash success. It was a success on the Genesis like always. But what people didn't know is that this wasn't even what it was supposed to be. The Simon Way prototype of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, named after the person who discovered it, is a well-known in-development version of the game dating from before the official release of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It was discovered on Chinese geosites before being widely distributed on the internet. The prototype is frequently examined by hackers to determine how the final game was developed. Since its leak, other prototypes were revealed in varying states of completion. And all we knew about this prototype was just basically the screenshot. Yeah, this one. Mario Kart XXL. Mario Kart XXL is a tech demo for the Game Boy Advance developed by Denaris Entertainment Software in 2004 as a test for GBA scaling capabilities. Mario Kart XXL only allows players to drive around a single track, no competitors, no item boxes, no winning. Coins can be seen scattered around the track, but for some reason you can't pick them up. Now, drifting wasn't really implicated into the game. Now, there's only a demo and play mode. Now, the game was, no longer released, and it was only discovered quite recently, but it's only just a demo. So, yeah. Also forgot to mention that Denaris would go on to make Crazy Frog Racer. Project HAMMER for the Nintendo Wii. Project Hammer was a beat-em-up video game in development by Nintendo Software Technology for the Nintendo Wii. The team's other projects included Metroid Prime Hunters, 1080 Degrees Avalanche, and Wave Race Blue Storm. Project Hammer was originally announced in E3, however, no information regarding the game has been released. However, the game has since been, unreleased as of now. The Abyss. The Legend of Zelda Mystical Seed of Courage Oracle Trilogy. The Legend of Zelda Mystical Seed of Courage was a planned but ultimately canceled third Game Boy Color game in the Oracle series, intended to be released alongside Oracle of the Seasons and Oracle of Ages. It was scrapped due to development complexities, particularly with linking the three games and managing the password system. So, yeah, it was canceled. Pokemon Z. Pokemon Z was a planned third version for the Kalos region, following X and Y, that was unfortunately, scrapped and canceled by Game Freak, so they could focus on Sun and Moon. It most likely would have expanded the Kalos story with new areas. By the way, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, make sure to correct me in the comments, please. Justice League Mortal, the video game. While bringing up the topic, let's talk about Justice League Mortal, shall we? Now, Justice League Mortal was a canceled George Miller film that would have had DJ Cotrona as Superman, Adam Brody as The Flash, Common as the Green Lantern, Santiago Cabrera as Aquaman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, and finally Armie Hammer as Batman. I didn't even know that Armie Hammer was set to play Batman before, but that would have aged so poorly since after hearing about what's going on with him now. There's a little known fact that apparently there was a tie-in game, in development. And it would have been developed by Double Helix Games, the same studio that made the Green Lantern movie tie-in game. And yes, I am talking about that Ryan Reynolds terrible Green Lantern film. However, after the main project, the movie was, canceled, this game also had been canceled. And all we got left are just screenshots. THQ's The Avengers. With Marvel's The Avengers being such a massive success, also, I don't want to hear any what else is massive comments. Come on, man, that meme is so dead. You know that there's going to be a tie-in video game, which was set to be made by THQ and also would have been a first-person shooter / beat-em-up game for the Nintendo Wii U, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Microsoft Windows. The game would have had you fighting against the Skrulls, which are an alien-type, Marvel character race. And there would have been other characters, like the obvious Black Widow and Hawkeye, but there would have been more like War Machine, Miss Marvel, the Fantastic Four, and Ant-Man, who would have been included as either NPCs or unlockable characters. Honestly, this game would have looked so perfect. But sadly, THQ has since been defunct, and we never got this game recently. Now, yes, THQ Nordic is still open, but, THQ Games Australia and other THQ businesses are shut down, unfortunately. South Park, Game Boy Color, and original Xbox. Now, South Park already came out on Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1, and was set to have a Game Boy Color version. However, that port ended up being canceled in 1999 due to Nintendo, Matt Stone, and Trey Parker, the creators of the show, not wanting to release an adult game that was on a system mostly owned by children. So the game was never released. Another South Park game, known as South Park, was a canceled open-world video game developed by both Ubisoft and BuzzMonkey Software in the year 2005. The game would have been released for the PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube. Unfortunately, this game has since been, canceled for unknown reasons. The game was mostly, forgotten about, and people were like, okay, you know what, we're not going to find this. Until someone finally rediscovered it on an old Xbox development kit. And there are some partial footage of the game. Crash Bandicoot Extreme Racing. Crash Bandicoot Extreme Racing was the original title for Crash Team Racing. Now, this developed prototype was since, canceled, and what we got was just Crash Team Racing. This is obscure because no footage really exists, and all we got left is just this. Donkey Kong Racing, GameCube. Donkey Kong Racing was a planned sequel to the game Diddy Kong Racing that would have been released for the GameCube. Unfortunately, this game has since been cancelled. This is actually because Rare was bought out by Microsoft. Now, Rare tried to rework it as an Xbox 360 title titled Superman Stampede, which was also unfortunately cancelled. The game would have also been a, Banjo-Kazooie racing game. The Sims Project Rene. Project Rene, or Sims 5, was a 5th Sims game that is still in development, and it's unknown when are we ever going to get the game. It was first unveiled in 2022, and we have not gotten any updates yet if it is ever going to get released. Yeah. Mega Man Universe, or Rockman Universe. Mega Man Universe was a cancelled 2.5D side-scrolling platformer for Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network. It was announced in 2010, and the game would have allowed people to create and share their own levels, customize characters like Bad Box Art Mega Man, and it would have had characters from other Capcom franchises. Essentially, this is just Mario Maker, but, Capcom, but unfortunately this game was canceled in 2011. It's unknown why this game got canceled, but there could be speculations on why it got canceled. The Dark Abyss. Polybius. Polybius was one of the biggest arcade urban legends of all time, and apparently the urban legend goes is that this game caused intense and addictive effects in players, and that apparently it could have been a part of a secret government experiment to mind control technology on children, saying that there were a lot of players that complained about hallucinations, amnesia, and seizures, and even death if they played for too long. Now, there are no evidence of this game ever existing, but if you really want to talk about Polybius, or if we want to hear about it, I highly go check the Angry Video Game Nerds video on it. It is both creepy and, perfect. Pokemon Black. Pokemon Black was a creepypasta video game that is about, a Pokemon game that supposedly turns you into a murderer. Now, this one is not true. It's more of like an urban legend, but there do exist some gameplay of it. Now, before you ask, it is fan-made gameplay. Super Mario Bros. Minus World 256. Now, Minus World 256 is more of a myth than, pure real Minus World glitch. The myth is that apparently because there aren't just, one Minus World, there's more than that, 256 Minus Worlds, because the NES using an 8-bit level ID, which technically has the values for 0 to 255, and some hacked or corrupt cartridges and early internet forums exaggerating the glitch. Fallout Brotherhood of Steel 2. Fallout Brotherhood of Steel 2 was a cancelled sequel to the 2004 action RPG Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. It would have been released on PlayStation 2 and original Xbox, and that it would have continued in Texas with new enemies like intelligent plants and mutated crocodiles. The game has since been cancelled. This is actually because the first game had poor sales and led to Interplay, the former owners of Fallout, cancelling the sequel. The original Five Nights at Freddy's 1 prototype. Now, there's not really information on a original FNAF 1 prototype, other than the fact that supposedly Scott claims that it's gone. The cancelled Pokemon MMO. Now, this one also doesn't really have that much information, other than the fact that it was a rumored internal pitch. The Sega Pluto. The Sega Pluto was an unreleased, upgraded Sega Saturn prototype from the mid-90s. Now, it was kept secret in 2013 until prototypes were then released. Sonic the Hedgehog Jr. Now, there's not really that much info on Sonic the Hedgehog Jr. or Sonic Jr. for short, other than the fact that it was a planned game for the Sega Pico. Now, the game was unfortunately cancelled, just like many other Sonic games that I just talked about earlier. So, that's pretty much it. Bonus tier. Once again, another PSP port. but this one, let's talk about it. Now, Earthworm Jim, also known as the working title Earthworm Jim PSP, was a game that was set to be released, well, actually was announced in the year 2006 for the PlayStation Portable. Now, it was initially thought to be a remake, but it would have featured mostly original content, and it would have been a 3D platformer. Now, the reason for the cancellation was due to a late-stage cancellation by the publisher Atari in the year 2007. Now, this game never got released, and all we got left is just some demos. Well, that's it, everyone. That's the whole lost, obscure, and canceled video game iceberg. Now, yes, I could have featured more games on this list, but I did it my own way. I'll also like to give credit to, or actually props to Blame It on Jorge and Tov. Now, it's because, I took inspiration for, their iceberg videos. Well, actually, not their iceberg videos. For Blame It on Jorge, it was because of his 40 lost and canceled video games, and for Tov, it's because I took inspiration for the TikTok iceberg, but I made it lost and obscure video games, and I'll put their channel description in my description. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.